Hello, and welcome everyone to Psychotherapy Networker. If you're joining us online, you might be thinking, who is this person? We haven't seen her before. Hi, I'm Jennifer Scott. I'm the digital editor here at Networker, and I have the pleasure to speak with Erica Turner, one of our contributors, one of our writers, who has written a piece that stopped me in my tracks. It stopped me in my tracks. Erica, I have to tell this story briefly, is that one of my jobs is I take everything that goes in the print magazine and make sure it's on the web. And this is one of the first times in the year and a half I've been here where I was working on the article and I stopped and started reading as a person who is getting something out of this. Because I've been here and your clients have been here, and I just really wanted to share this. So the article that she wrote was about the grind culture to work malaise. And let's dig into that, because this is something that's affecting people more than we think. First of all, define these terms for us. What is grind culture? What is work malaise?
Yeah, so grind culture, quite simply, is sort of this idea of this always needing to be working, always needing to be pushing forward, moving forward, always looking after the next thing. And so I'd say we've been in grind culture for the past, I don't know, maybe decade or so, where there's really been this emphasis on always moving forward career-wise, professionally, to the point, and I talk about this a little bit in the piece and can talk about a little bit more in our conversation, where I've had clients who felt like even though that they, were accomplished in their careers and stable financially, felt like if they weren't pushing to the next thing, that they were somehow failing. Or if they weren't in their dream job, then they had somehow let themselves down or let their family down or something like that. And these are people who are by all accounts financially stable, in good jobs, that meet a variety of their needs. But grind culture is all about being on the treadmill. It's always the next thing. It's always pushing forward. It's always moving on. And that's obviously not sustainable.
No,
you can't really do that. What does that actually look like in reality?
it's like burnout. Looks like.
Yeah, exactly. So that I think kind of gets at the heart of grind culture is you can always be doing more. And particularly if you have a more anxious personality, it is very easy to attach to this idea that you can and should always be doing more and pushing forward.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And then we have people have now kind of been coming out of that, and now we're getting into this work malaise. Tell me a little bit about what that looks like.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see the work malaise as kind of just the other side of the coin, right? Like this idea, if you always keep moving forward, eventually you hit a wall and you can't keep doing that. So I see the work malaise, the way that it comes up in the therapy room is people saying that they're not really interested in work. They don't really want to work. We shouldn't have to work. Those are some more of the cultural messages that we're seeing. And to me, it seems like a very natural outgrowth of both sort of the other side of hustle culture. And I think the reality of work in terms of what we're seeing economically, in terms of people's opportunities. I think there is a genuine sense that you can never work hard enough to keep yourself safe, right? To keep yourself always financially stable. And I think people have caught on to that, right? Like no amount of work will save you from capitalism, essentially. And I think people they've connected to that. That's the reality. So there does tend to be more of this, like almost even, what's the word? Even this sort of feeling that like work is for suckers, essentially. And how do you get out of the rat race? How do you not have to participate in it at all? So it's these. I think what happens in the culture is we get these very extreme messages, and then we as individuals are trying to figure out what to do with those extreme messages, and then with our own sort of personal history, obviously plays a big role into how we interpret and understand those messages.
It's true. And what's interesting about this article is when I put it up, I noticed in amongst the comments, and we can't always tell how old people are, of course, but in the comments, you're kind of filtering through and you're looking at profile pictures and stuff. And I noticed a lot of older people being like, what does he mean? I don't want to work, or I'm not meant to work, or I don't dream of labor. Like that quote, that great meme that's floating around. And yet this article is actually geared toward a little bit more towards Gen Z. One of the people that you mentioned here is of that age range. So do you think this is a generational thing? Do you think people perhaps from maybe Gen X or boomers or people from further on, they just don't get it? Work is part of life. You work to eat. This is part of our lifestyle. And if you don't have this grind culture, it actually says something negative about you. So is this kind of generational issue?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a generational issue in the sense that Gen Z is entering the labor force, right? Like they're the youngest members of the labor force. And there is always some sort of backlash or cultural response to the newest crop of folks entering the labor force. I'm an elder millennial. I'm on the old side of millennial. And certainly, I mean, all you'd have to do is Google millennial and work, and you can find 1,000 think pieces on millennial relationship to work. When we entered the labor force about 15 years ago, 15 to 20 years ago. So I think it's generational in the sense that this is the generation that is encountering this problem right now. But there's always a little bit of like, the younger generation, what do they know? They think they know everything. Like, I think that's natural and normal in terms of our sort of culture and society. But I also think that Gen Z is facing unique challenges that were not seen in previous generations, or not fully understood in previous generations. I think our social safety net has eroded. There's the looming sense of climate change. And I see people say, what do I even need a retirement package for when we don't even know what the planet is going to look like when I'm in my 60s, 80s? We don't even know what the weather will be outside. So why am I focused on retirement? I do think that this generation is, they are facing particular challenges that I think were not faced or not understood before. Obviously, climate change has been a problem for years, but understanding its impact is, I think, more recent. So.
And it's interesting you bring into play the climate change and other issues, and especially without having that safety net. My first thought, I feel a little bit anxious just listening to this. And I wonder, are you seeing an anxiety issue coming in with what are your clients feeling like when they're coming in with these issues? Are they anxious about it? Is this a depression issue? From a therapist standpoint, what do you see your clients grappling with here?
Yeah, it's interesting. And I do tend to skew towards more anxious clients overall. But I find with this issue, there's less anxiety, or less sort of on the surface anxiety, and more resignation, more of this sense of, honestly, what I would say closer to hopelessness of there's nothing we can really do about it, right? Like, this isn't going to change. The systems feel big and overwhelming to clients. And so I think that plays into the work malaise, where it's like, what's the point of any of this anyway, right? Why are we even doing this? What's the point of working harder or striving when we live in such an uncertain and precarious time? And so I think in a lot of ways, those feelings are appropriate for the context in which we find ourselves. They don't seem disproportionate to me of the sort of current state of where we are.
How, when you mention hopelessness, that's I mean, that's a hard thing for us as I like to say, as lay people perhaps to grapple with. But you all as therapists, you see hopeless people who feel hopeless all the time in your office. So what, and I mean, I know this is on a different, it's a case by case basis, but just in general, what do you, how do you approach that? How do you approach that client when they're looking outside and saying, what's the point? It's all going to be over soon. Like, what do you, how do you approach that person, or how do you try to get them to a place of hope, if that's even possible?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing to me is to honor where they are right now. I mean, honoring the sense of hopelessness in terms of it's not coming from nowhere. It makes sense given the situation. And so to me, the first thing is to communicate, I'm not afraid of your hopelessness. I'm not reactive to it. I can sit with you in it. I can be with you in that space. And usually when there is a sense that that part of them is heard and understood, then there is an opportunity for exploration of, if this is what the world is, then what do I want in my own life? What is important for me to prioritize in terms of my own need and my own needs? And when I say my own needs, I mean both sort of our individual needs, but also our collective and communal needs, right? Like, how can I make connections with family, friends, people that are important to me? If this is it, if this is the only life I get and this is what it looks like, it actually becomes even more important for me to create a life that feels joyful, intentional, purposeful, meaningful. And so the process becomes exploring what that looks like for that particular individual.
I like that. And that helps me feel more, sorry, my throat. That helps me feel more hopeful just even hearing that. So another interesting aspect of this is we talk about work. We're also talking about you all as therapists. We've heard a lot of different conversations about how therapists are managing in these type of hopeless situations, therapists and burnout, therapists and perhaps that work malaise, because we all look at you and you're thinking, you all are in the chair, you've got it all together, because
lies
you got it going on and you don't have any problems at all. But the interesting thing that we see working with therapists and telling therapist stories is that obviously that's not true. So when you think about therapists in grind culture and work malaise, how do therapists keep up that passion for their craft? How do they keep up that enthusiasm to work with people who feel hopeless, to work with to work in this climate? What do you all as therapists do?
Yeah. So, I mean, the first thing I'm going to acknowledge is privilege, right? If you have the privilege to do this, is to be able to manage your own schedule, essentially, right? Like, to be able to avoid overcommitting or overextending yourselves. Obviously, depending on your own sort of financial situation and other circumstances, you may be limited in how much you can control your own schedule. But I also know a lot of therapists who have a good amount of privilege and an ability to control their schedule and their time, and consistently overextend themselves and overcommit themselves. And I am not talking about myself at all. That's just other therapists, not me. I never do that. But being realistic about what you can commit of yourself and really taking stock of our work is beautiful and wonderful. I don't want to do anything else. There's nothing else I want more than the work that I'm doing. And it extracts a cost emotionally, physically, and you have to be very honest with your particular self about what that cost looks like for you and how you're going to mitigate it. So that's thing number one. And I'll say really quickly, the second piece for me is finding new ways to sort of reignite that passion, that spark, whether that's learning a new modality, whether that's giving back in terms of teaching or supervising, especially if you're further along in your career. I know for me, teaching has been a huge sort of influx of energy and thoughtfulness. I learned so much from my students. And so that sort of just reignites all of that fire that I have for our field. But broadly, I would say go learn new stuff, essentially. I don't know if I can curse. Go learn new stuff, do new things. And even if you don't do them well, there's something about turning your brain on in that way that can help reignite your passion, thoughtfulness, consideration of your work in this field.
Oh wow. I love that angle, because there's such an idea of maybe you just kind of sit in it and then you just wallow, and then you just, I know therapists who have burned out on that craft, and to think that perhaps the answer is filling back in.
Absolutely.
That's a gem right there. We need to save that. I hope you all were listening. That was really good. Well, we could talk about this for a while, but we're not going to keep anyone any longer. Erica writes such amazing pieces for us. So I really think you should not only check out this article, that the link is below, but also subscribe to Networker. This is what we do. We tell stories, as Livia, our editor-in-chief, always tells us, like, we are telling stories from the heart of psychotherapy. And this is what it is. It's not just what you are providing for your clients. It's also what you are providing for yourself in this craft, because goodness, we need you all now more than ever. We do.
Well, thank you. I'm glad we could chat today.
Yes, thank you so much, Erica. And thank you all for joining us. And we will see you on psychotherapienetworker.org.